All right. How does someone prepare for something as big and daunting as hiking the Appalachian Trail? In this episode, we'll be talking to Chris Dunn. Chris is an exercise physiologist by trade and the owner, founder, and coach of Ascend Human Performance Coaching. He has a wealth of knowledge and has helped hundreds of athletes achieve great things through his coaching and coaching methods. I am excited to have him here to help us aspiring Appalachian Trail through hikers, especially our older hikers, get properly prepared to do the Appalachian Trail. Without further ado, welcome Chris to the show.
Thanks, Dave. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, this is fun. We finally get to do something professionally together.
Agree.
Right. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as far as kind of your background, kind of go a little bit in depth and why you are the right guy for me to have on this program as a 57-year-old aspiring AT through hiker.
Well, I guess it'll be my burden to bear to attempt to convince you that I am the right person. But we'll tackle that in just a moment. As far as my background, I think your introduction did a really good job in sort of setting that up and framing what I do professionally. Currently, I am an exercise physiologist. I have a master's degree in health and sports science and have been in the field of exercise physiology since the very, very early 90s, mostly in the clinical setting. But I have been coaching as a side hustle throughout the entirety of my clinical career. I just was doing it part time. At the end of 2017, I decided to leave my full-time 30-year clinical career and run my coaching business full-time, which is what I'm doing now. So as an exercise physiologist, I as you said, I currently own and operate a human performance coaching business. And I have the great fortune to coach 30 or so athletes. I should say 30 or so individuals. Most are athletes, not all. I do have some folks that are purely recreationalists that just do enjoy being the best versions of themselves, and that's what I work to do. I was thinking about this, Dave, when as I was thinking about this episode and how I would introduce myself. I like to say I'm an ordinary guy who helps people do extraordinary things.
That's nicely put.
And that's sort of what it boils down to. And I think partly that's why I'm here today.
Right. Well, and I've known you for a long time, and I've kind of watched you from the side a little bit, especially with your with the acidotic racing. And I was always admired you from that standpoint, to be able to kind of take something and add your passion into it and get people basically off the couch and doing some great trail races. So it's always been fun to watch, from the sides. I did my own little thing for a little bit, but yeah, I admired that aspect of it. That's mostly what I saw, but of course, the exercise physiology is what, that draws you here today.
Yeah, well, I think that's well put. I have dedicated my professional career to helping people be healthier and fitter, whether that was in a clinical setting, helping people return from a heart disease diagnosis, or in my current health and fitness career path, and helping people achieve and accomplish extraordinary things. It really is all about helping people to become healthier and more active, for sure.
Right. And especially, as our careers have gone on, myself as a physical therapist and you as an exercise physiologist. I mean, if you're not in it to help other people, then there's really no reason to get up in the morning. So we've both kind of been doing that. Or we both have been doing that, successfully. So it's really nice when, this YouTube channel for me is, trying to help people kind of regain that, that bucket list to get back out there, because a lot of us have kind of raise families and whatnot. And now it's like, okay, now it's time to start to check off those bucket list items. So let me ask you my first question. We will go in the order that I had sent them to you, if that's okay.
Of course.
All right.
Let's go.
Yep. All right. So question one, what are some of the physical challenges that you see specific for an older hiker who wants to hike the Appalachian Trail? And I just, and I put that out there because, like I said, a lot of us have may have come from the endurance world or, racing and stuff, but now it's almost like a start over, but, we're a little, I guess, worse out of shape at this point.
Well, I was thinking a little bit about that question today when I was out on a trail run myself. And, for me, Dave, I think it actually has less to do with age and it has more to do with fitness.
Okay.
Now, I come to that perspective from a couple of different directions. First, you mentioned acidotic racing, my event management business. I have the opportunity a handful of times a year to put on trail and mountain races in which we attract a wide array of individuals, a wide array of ages.
Yep.
From youth in their teens and younger folks in their 20s, all the way up to seniors and beyond, folks, in their 70s and 80s, and occasionally we've had a 90-year-old show up to one of our
Nice.
events. And then from my clinical perspective, having the opportunity to work with principally older individuals, and then sort of kind of have it come full circle with my coaching business, and once again working with people of all ages. I truly believe that it's not an age thing. I think it's a fitness thing. Right.
Okay.
So let me reframe that question and then answer it. So what are some of the physical challenges specific for someone who has lost connection with their activity plan?
Yes, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now it may be those individuals are older, but I don't necessarily think that's a significant component. Surely there are age-related physical changes.
Yeah.
I mean, the biology of aging is a real thing. In fact, I taught that as a class at the University of New Hampshire a handful of years. So the biology of aging is a real thing. The human body does age. Yet, I don't think there's any question that physical activity helps to offset some of the more deleterious effects of aging. So if we take it from a fitness standpoint, Dave, rather than an aging standpoint, I think really the first challenge that comes to mind is to for someone who is starting this journey of preparing to hike the Appalachian Trail, who is, well, let's say they're not at their peak physical condition anymore, right?
Yep.
Maybe
you're looking at them.
Yeah, maybe they're a few years or a decade from that peak physical condition. I think the first important consideration is increasing the activity volume slowly enough so as not to cause an overuse injury. Because the last thing that you want, right, when you start an activity plan, particularly an activity plan that has such a grandiose goal as to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail or even section hike the Appalachian Trail, the last thing you want is any downtime from your activity pattern because you have broken down. And you've broken down because perhaps you've accelerated your activity pattern too quickly and have caused an overuse injury. So I think, Dave, that's probably the number one challenge is to avoid overuse injuries that are oftentimes associated with increasing their activity pattern too quickly.
Nice. I like that. And early in the year, starting in January, I started doing one lap around my neighborhood, just walking. And by July, every month I added a lap each night. But I got to the point in July where it got really hot. So by that point, I was doing 3 or 4 hikes, 2 to 3 hikes a week, and then I was filling it in with the walking. But I got up to 7 laps, and I figured, okay, that's 7 laps in my neighborhood is roughly an hour and 45 minutes. I've since kind of dropped off of that to do more hiking, but I can certainly see in January or February when I was hiking one lap, that was plenty.
For sure.
And then, building it up by July, I was like, okay, I could do this all night, and, decided not to for the sake of keeping a family together. But
Good
no,
reason.
so that's a good point. And I think up here in the White Mountains, the trouble is you go out for a hike and you might be, gaining 4,000 feet of elevation, and you might be your strength and endurance might be worth, I don't know, 500 feet of elevation. So that people have to really be careful about that, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think for sure that's, I mean, for me, that's, as a professional human performance coach, that is a really important consideration. And that is, we always want to work to advance fitness, but we don't want to do it at the cost of developing an overuse injury that prevents us from being physically active. Right.
Yes.
So, the way you described your activity progression, is sort of exactly the way to do it. Now, of course, you also brought up another challenge, and I think eventually we're going to talk about it, and that's this activity specific approach. Right. And, how do we work up to hiking in the White Mountains, or hiking sections of the Appalachian Trail? How do we go from walking in our neighborhood, presumably relatively flat, to taking on longer, more arduous bouts of activity with much more climbing? I think there's a very purposeful way to do that. There's a way to generally prepare for it, and there's a way to specifically prepare for it, for sure.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let's get on to question 2. I think was kind of also dovetailing what we were just talking about. But what is the first thing you would tell an older backpacker to do to get going training? It sounds like you've kind of already answered that, but maybe if there's anything else you might want to add.
Yeah. So I would like to add to that. Again, I don't think it's as much to do about age as it has to do with fitness, right? So if we're talking about anyone who is who aspires to take on something as significant as through hiking the Appalachian Trail, and who is starting at a relatively low level of fitness and a relatively low activity pattern, I really think that the first place to start is actually in the gym.
Okay.
Believe it or not. Now, the good news is, and that fortunately, that people don't necessarily need to be limited to just one type of activity in order to prepare for it. But I do think that the strength that is developed specifically through strength training, and that's what I mean by the gym. That the type of fitness that is developed through strength training, for me, really is the foundation for an epic challenge like through hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Okay.
Of course, at some point you're going to need to add and maybe start adding endurance type activity like walking and eventually hiking. You can start adding that right away. But I really feel like for folks that want to take on that challenge, that are starting at a relatively low level of fitness, it's much easier to start in the gym at the start than it is to try to figure out how to add the gym as an activity component later in the program when they become much more heavily involved in hiking. All right. So that for that reason, I think starting in the gym, and we can certainly talk more specifically about what to do, but starting in the gym, I think, is probably the best place to start for someone who needs to build their fitness toward that sort of goal. Right.
No, and that makes sense because, we're looking at folks who have let themselves go. That's, I don't know how to put that delicately, but I guess.
Here, I'll try to put it. I'll try to help you, Dave, because I talk about this all the time. I mean, I think what happens is that their physical activity, and sometimes, i.e., their health, just falls so far down the priority list that
Right.
it just doesn't routinely get done, right? So, I mean, any and all of our productivity has to do with how high we prioritize it.
Right.
So if we prioritize something high enough,
Mhm.
even if it's something that maybe it's not terribly pleasurable or something we don't really enjoy doing, but we understand and value the benefit of it,
Right.
that we will prioritize it. And when it is sufficiently and highly enough prioritized, it just gets done. The trouble is, or the challenge is, that as we get into middle age and we're raising families and we're really successful career wise and we're just get busy doing other things, we prioritize our own health and well-being oftentimes.
Right.
And so because it falls so far down the priority list, it just doesn't routinely or consistently get done.
Right. Yeah. And I, as a physical therapist, I totally agree with the strength, because that's what we do. I mean, somebody comes in and they can't walk. Well, we get them stronger. I mean, we don't say walk around the gym 500 times. So it totally makes sense. We also work a lot with the core, and you can address that as well. But that's where, we start to lose flexibilities. We start to lose strength in our core. Our hips fall asleep, so to speak, right? And then we continue to make that slide. So that does sound, and I think that's, it's right on the mark, and it's easier to start a shorter program with a lot of bang for your buck.
That's
When you say,
correct.
30 minutes of strength training instead of, walking on a treadmill for an hour.
Yeah, well, and you know this too, Dave, that that the neuromuscular adaptations associated with strength training are really quite rapid. Like we begin to see noticeable improvements in strength in a relatively short time. Just because of the way the neuromuscular system adapts to strength training. That's a little different than changes in aerobic fitness. While obviously changes in aerobic fitness are possible, the changes come on slower, and they're also not as easily recognized. Okay. But you can go in the gym and, day one, maybe you were able to do 10 pounds on the chest press machine. Well, by the second week, you're doing 30 pounds on the chest press machine. So you can see real changes. And then it doesn't take that much longer after that, Dave, that you begin to see physical changes in the mirror when after you get out of the shower, right? That are almost always associated with the work that you put in the gym. That's also inspiring, right? And it drives us and it pulls us toward that activity even tighter.
Excellent. Let's look at our third question.
Right.
So as far as this question is more about the tools or the apps that hikers might want to use as far as their training. So are there any special tools or apps that you would recommend for somebody when they're getting started? I use or have used a heart rate monitor in the past. This, or any other watch, Apple Watch, I don't know, anything like that. I guess I'm just, throwing it out there because this is not my area of specialty as far as the tools that we use. Like I said, back in the day, I used a heart rate monitor, and then my bicycle had all sorts of metrics on it. But yeah, just if there's anything special that you might recommend.
Yeah, well, as you would imagine, in the age of technology that we live in, yes, there is quite a bit of technology that is associated with fitness and the fitness industry. GPS enabled devices now are very common. Most endurance athletes own one, sometimes multiple GPS enabled devices. Now, these GPS enabled devices are wearables, whether you wear it on your wrist, like a Sunto wristwatch, or you attach it to your bike, like this little Garmin bike computer. All of these devices have the ability to collect your activity data and specifically collect your heart rate activity data. The collection of that heart rate activity data then goes into a database. Each of these devices has a platform that they use. Sunto has their own platform. Garmin has their own platform. These platforms aggregate your activity data and present it in multiple different charts to allow you to see your activity progress over time. I'll also say too that that there are there are websites and web apps like Strava, which is fairly common in the endurance world. Strava, just within the last few years, added a metric or two metrics called fitness and freshness, which is sort of getting to your point, and that is, how. Are there apps that help to track activity and quantify activity? Yes. And do those apps help us to understand when we are training properly? Yes, they do. And can these apps, if we collect our activity data sufficiently and consistently enough, are these apps helpful in quantifying our training stress, to help us to begin to see measurable progress in terms of our quantifiable fitness, and B, help to identify when we are maybe getting into that red zone or that yellow zone? In other words, we're maybe pushing a little bit too hard. The answer is absolutely they do. So I would encourage, and I do encourage my clients to use a GPS-enabled device to collect all of their activity data, and specifically collect the heart rate data associated with those activities, because it can help. It helps me quantify the activity, and it helps me determine when an individual is ready to perform at their peak capacity. Okay.
No, that's excellent. The next question, it's going to be more, I'll preface the next question with, back in the day, I used to take my heart rate every morning. I would get my base heart rate, and I could tell, depending on the day, depending on how high my heart rate was first thing in the morning, like if I was starting to head down the wrong trail as far as being overtrained. And that was kind of my first metric before I even, got out of bed, so to speak, right? So with that said, I'll call them markers. What is it that we need to look out for in regards to overtraining or overexertion when we're out in the trail, or even leading up to that? Because if we're going to start slow and build ourselves up over time, we're also going to have a chance of overdoing it. I think of, different signs of dehydration or insomnia, elevated heart rate, stuff like that. But again, that's just my basic understanding of, what's going on. So if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, sure. Let me start by making sure that the audience understands that there is a distinction, and an important distinction, between overtraining, which is a real significant phenomena. In fact, it can be a medically significant phenomena. Overtraining is a syndrome that can take months to a year to recover from. It's a deal breaker. The last thing that any active individual or endurance athlete needs or wants to deal with is overtraining. It's a really, really bad deal. I'll also say too that it's a fairly rare phenomena, meaning that I'm not suggesting that it doesn't happen. I'm just suggesting that it takes an extraordinarily high volume of activity over a protracted period of time in order to even get close to that phenomena. Again, don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting it doesn't happen. I'm just suggesting that it's really hard. The levels to which you have to push yourself to get even close to that they're extraordinary. Okay. Now, what is much more common though, Dave, and I think what you were referring to is a phenomenon known as overreaching. Okay. So overreaching is very common. In fact, most active people engaged in a progressively overloaded activity pattern will experience some level of overreaching. Now, what does that feel like? Well, what that feels like is a lot of carried fatigue, maybe even some carried soreness from a previous workout into the next day's workout.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a
Okay.
progressively overloaded activity pattern, we need to see some level of overreaching. Like that's part of it,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
I mean, you
Right.
know, the overload principle suggests that the body will only continue to adapt and to reach new heights of performance if it is challenged sufficiently with
Mhm.
a challenge that is a little bit above and beyond what it is accustomed
Right.
to. So there
Yep.
there has to be some progressiveness to these activity patterns. So some level of carried fatigue and carried soreness within an activity pattern, within a training plan is completely appropriate. That's called overreaching. That's actually a good sign. It knows that it tells us that the volume is sufficient enough. However, Dave,
Mm.
if that carried fatigue or soreness persists more than, say, 72 hours, more than 3 days, then what ends up happening is that your activity pattern starts to get compromised because you're not
Mm.
able to perform at
Mm.
optimal levels because you are carrying so much fatigue and soreness from the previous 2 days of activity. So for me, it can be really simple and just as simple as that. You know,
Mhm.
2 days of soreness and fatigue, that's fine. Grind through it.
Right.
But boy, if you're
Yeah.
going on that third day and you're
Mm.
still feeling a lot of fatigue and
Mm.
soreness such that you're having a difficult time executing on your planned activity, well, that's
Mhm.
a pretty good indication that you need some form of rest. Now that can be relative rest,
Yep.
meaning instead of doing a arduous hour session in the gym, maybe you take a light 20-minute walk with your dogs.
Mhm. Mhm.
It can also mean absolute rest, which just
Mm.
as it sounds, maybe you just need to take a day off, no
Right.
activity, put your feet up and rest. So that's the important distinction, is that overtraining is a very significant phenomena characterized by many of the things that you described:
Yep.
alterations, heart rate, mood, sleep disturbances, weight change. I mean, it's a horrible phenomena.
Mm.
And in
Mhm.
fact, it can take months to a year to recover from.
Mm.
And all physical activity needs to essentially shut down.
Right.
Overreaching, though, very common. In fact, you should
Yep.
experience some measure of that during an activity pattern. Just
Mhm.
got to make sure that if it persists more than 2 days,
Yep.
you need to take some form of rest, either relative or absolute.
Yep. Okay. So it sounds like leading up to it, we need to be wary of it, but also using this when we're on the trail. If it might mean longer rests in town. Spending either, like you said, relative rest, meaning go into town, walk around, get back on trail, and only go a mile. Versus getting off trail and calling it good for a day and not
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
back on
yeah, for
trail.
sure. And I
Yeah.
think specifically as it relates to being on the AT. Obviously, you're going to have a hike plan, but
Mhm.
like any plan, you have to be flexible enough and be able to.
Yep.
You have to adapt that plan, on the fly. I mean, there's no way that you can plan out the entirety of how that trip is going to go, just because there's so many unknown variables. However,
Right.
again, a good example, to your point, a good example of a relative rest day may be, maybe today is that third day. I'm feeling a lot of soreness and fatigue. I had planned a 10-mile day today. It's going to be a 5-mile day, and I'm going to have to make
Right.
camp somewhere between where I am now and where I had planned to be.
Right.
Because if I try to push all the way through to my originally predetermined camp spot, I just may get myself so far in the hole that it may take me
Right.
3 additional days to recover. And by that point, now
Mhm.
I'm way out of phase. I'm way off
Right.
schedule.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of one of those things when I go hiking in the whites, I don't pay attention to that because I have 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to be at work and not hike. So it's always easy. But when you get in a situation where you're expected to hike 2,200 miles, it's something that's very important to pay attention.
For sure.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate you saying that because I'm sure the audience will listening to it from somebody like yourself versus, going out on the trail and like somebody telling you peer pressure, oh, we're going to be here, there, whatever. And you may not be ready for that. I've watched enough YouTube vlogs from the 2023 group of hikers that, some of them I think overreached, and they tried to keep up with people that they weren't really appropriately hiking with. They were fat. The other people were faster, and they were trying to keep up. And that's a no-win game from that, from that standpoint. Yeah. So as far as, I read a lot about the ramp up mileage, the first month, spend time doing 8 to 10 miles. And then, you can build up to 12s, 15s and work your way up. And most people say it's roughly a month to get to the 15-mile mark as far as a day on the Appalachian Trail. But that's kind of, for me, that's anecdotal evidence. That's people, from their experience and whatnot. What would you think would be something, some idea of that, and is it a matter of just paying attention to your body versus looking at numbers as far as mileage?
Well, I think, I think this gets to this idea of general preparation, specific preparation, and then execution when you're on the trail. Those three components, right? So, I mean, you're going to have a hike plan that you're going to have to lay out, right? Just estimates of where you're going to be and when you're going to be there for things like drop shipments and rendezvous with crew or family or whatever it happens to be. You kind of have to lay out some sort of hike plan. Right. Again, there's a lot of variables that go into play there. Things that you can't account for that may slow you down, right? And any particular stretch of the trail. So two things. The first thing is I do think that the phenomena of hiking yourself into shape 100% exists, particularly on the AT, where and whether it's a month or whether it's 6 weeks, at some point, you get into the groove. Your rhythm and routine becomes intimately connected with the trail, and you almost become one with the trail. And your ability to cover more ground more efficiently does improve after that initial 4-6 week period of time, whatever it happens to be. Now, whether that translates into you being able to accomplish more miles in any particular day, I frankly think that has more to do with the terrain of the AT and the section of the AT that you're in than it is fitness necessarily. For instance, as classically the sections of the AT through Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine are infamously rugged. Versus other sections of the AT that you may be able to cruise a little bit on. Okay. So the AT is not one homogeneous terrain in terms of trail condition. It's quite variable from start to end. So that's one thing to consider. Yes, there is this concept of hiking yourself into shape. But I also think, again, from a human performance standpoint, I do think that it's possible to prepare yourself before you even get there, and work your hiking fitness up, to be able to tolerate whatever it happens to be, whatever your goals are early on, whether that's, whatever your average miles per day end up coming out to, that you can start the hike physically prepared to take that challenge on, rather than relying on needing the first month or 6 weeks to get yourself into shape. I think you can show up in Stone Mountain, Georgia. That's the start of the AT, right?
Springer Mountain,
Georgia. There is a Stone Mountain, Georgia.
There is a Stone Mountain. That was in the Olympics, I believe.
My point is, you can show up in Georgia at the start of the AT, the northbound hike. You can show up ready to go. Right. And that comes down to preparation. Yeah. So that's my take on that.
Excellent. No, and I appreciate that. So if people have not subscribed already to my channel, please do so and like it and share this with others who may benefit from this. I would appreciate that. But I want to turn it over to Chris so you can plug whatever it is you want to plug, your podcast, send people your way, and and take it over from here.
Yeah,
Over to you.
sure. So, yeah, so for anyone listening to this particular segment on Dave's YouTube channel, for more content, relative the same, you can head over to my podcast, Eat Half, Walk Double podcast, available on Spotify and a half dozen other platforms. My coaching business, Ascend Human Performance Coaching, can be found at ascendendurancecoaching.com. And also, through my social media feeds, Chris J. Dunn. I'm pretty easy to follow and find on all those other social media feeds for more information about what I do and how and why I'm doing it. That'd be the places to go.
Yes, and I will include all links to Chris's stuff, so that people can find you easily. Just in my description, I'll put links in that. Folks we will be meeting with Chris and talking with Chris again. I totally appreciate your time and your effort in this, Chris. It's been a pleasure from my end. Hopefully my folks have learned about kind of all this, kind of getting started physically and getting prepared for the Appalachian Trail. So, do you have anything else to add, Chris?
Nope. Thanks for the invite, Dave. It was a pleasure.
All right. Perfect. And so I appreciate it. And as always, happy hiking.